Alright, so I'm going to automate trade because I don't want to mess around with it, and I'm going to end up having to trade with my enemies anyways. So what can you do about it? For this one, I don't need any destroyers. I'm going to keep the submarines because those are pretty handy, and we're going to build a bunch of IC, which is the typical way that people play the Soviet Union in 36. Obviously, part of the way that I built my stuff, I don't have any standing army units, so I need a lot less consumer goods than I normally would. And also my upgrades are in a better state than if I took the regular starting point. But, you know, what can you do? I don't need to actually produce the max supplies because I'm pretty sure I'll end up getting them through trade. And then for the government, it turns out that susceptibility to Comintern, which the historical foreign minister Maxim Litvinov, a big proponent of collective security, gives you, I was always under the impression that that meant people were more susceptible to you, but it turns out that it really just has no effect whatsoever. So we'll let him deal with that. And then Kaganovich was the Minister of Transportation. He's a comedic figure in some ways, and also an evil figure because he kind of had a hand in the famine in Ukraine. So, you know, kind of funny guy, not so funny things that he did. So we're gonna, any case, I'm gonna put Stalin in there because I need more supplies, and what Kaganovich gives me isn't particularly useful. I'll tell some stories about Kaganovich as I play through because they're pretty comedic. Alright, so espionage for the first couple days, intelligence, all counter-espionage, a little bit of national unity, and a little bit of ruling party support. Not gonna worry about sending spies abroad. Luckily on a custom start, none of this priority stuff is already set. So, and then we jack up the speed and get going. And that should be enough for operation. Put a bunch of spies in the country. It is. Get a little bit of diplomacy so we can keep trading, and then we go into the important bits. Luckily, you can double click on all this just to make it happen, so I'm going to be pretty efficient with all of it. And industrial tech, armor technology, all very important for the USSR. And I like to just stick it out here and there. All this stuff. It's like, you know, it's like going to the store. What would you like? All of it. Okay. And then naval, not ready for that yet, but we are ready for this. And get us some fighter pilot training. What am I missing? Because usually it's more expensive than this. Oh well, we'll do basic bomb too. Wait, what do we need? But, oh, well, never mind. Don't need you anyways. Okay, there we go. That should be good. And this law thing is gonna go on about specialist training over and over again. I don't need it, and I don't want it. So, too bad. And now we just play through the game. So, while we run the game, I'll talk a bit about international politics in 1936 as they stood in relation to the Soviet Union. So, nobody's at war with the Soviet Union. A few countries didn't recognize their existence still, like Switzerland and Belgium were real long holdouts. I'll put a submarine up north here. And stick it under the army group. Okay. But for the most part, everybody out here recognized them. There had been, oh dear. So we get a random event. Need to figure out what to do with that. Jack our consumer goods to make it go away is what I'm gonna do. Alright, so we had a few days delay on our factory building. The Soviets had been at war in Xinjiang, or today I think it's called Xinjiang, It's a mostly Islamic part of China, and Russia sort of controlled this area throughout the time period where China was sort of divided into different groups of warring factions that were occasionally allied and occasionally not. Officially, the Soviet Union supported the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek, but they also sort of supported the communists led by Mao Zedong. Mao is in that little mountainous area there. Leading his revolution. Okie dokie, and that should be the last unit we have to put down for a little while. Afghanistan, Persia, relations were pretty much normal. Turkey was a good friend to the Soviet Union. Oh man, I'm getting screwed with these events. So we're gonna arrest them, because that's what Stalin may have done anyways. So now that's gonna jack our consumer good need. Poland and the Soviet Union were not friends at all, because Poland had been a part of Tsarist Russia for quite some time, and also the Soviet Union and Poland went to war in the 20s. The Soviets took Warsaw, and then they kind of collapsed. So, let's see. Consumer goods, major worker strike, yeah, whatever. Nothing important. Okay, so they weren't particularly good friends. Romania was turning fascist at the time, but prior to that, relations were a little strained, but not too bad. The Baltic states were in a arrangement against the Soviet Union. I'll talk about Ethiopia in a bit. They had a pact where they would sort of hold together. Not that it would have been effective, but they were there. They had too been part of Tsarist Russia only 20 years prior. And then Romania and Poland as well had a agreement to come to each other's aid in the event of war. Germany has Hitler, who came to power and was incredibly anti-Soviet. So that's a problem, the main problem of the era. Finland is a democratic country at this time, a former colony of Tsarist Russia. And they weren't really friendly with the Soviets, but it's not, you know, it's like an old girlfriend, basically, was their relations. Like, they weren't real big fans of each other, but it wasn't like they were about to kill one another. Also, Italy, led by Mussolini, felt the need to invade Ethiopia, one of the last independent countries in Africa, and really the only truly independent country in Africa left after the colonization drive. They ended up beating the Ethiopian army, which had people using muskets and spears and so on. They fought pretty well, though, and they held up and embarrassed the Italian army, who was using modern weapons several times. And the Italians also came under massive criticism because they used chemical weapons on the Ethiopians to aid them in the winning of the war. But as you can see, Africa at the time is mostly colonized by different countries, mainly mainly Spain, France, Britain, Italy, Belgium, and then there's little South Africa down there. And Portugal has this whole region in the southeast, and a little place in Bissau. That's about it for Africa. The Soviets didn't really have tons of interest there. Iraq is a British colony. Saudi Arabia is mainly under the control of the British. Yemen and Oman are both British colonies. Yemen is a tiny little corner in a much larger British colony, so that's basically the state of the world. Yugoslavia is a monarchy that's huge and multi-ethnic. And we're gonna just keep doing our artillery stuff here. Germany's very anti-France and very anti-United Kingdom, so that's problematic. And Spain is on the cusp of a civil war. We should probably get a notice about that shortly. because it should trigger. There's basically ongoing civil war in China, even when there's peace. Like, there's always something going on in there, usually throughout the whole of the 1930s. Alright, so we should get a little boost there. I should see what we're doing here. Get more factories. Mongolia is a client state slash puppet of the Soviet Union in this time period, so they're not independent by any means. And we'll go to land doctrines, because we need... Land doctrines are really hard to research, and I need a bunch of them. Okay, so there we go. Keep doing that air research. And that will hopefully get us through the 1930s. France has the Popular Front. Hitler's election was a pretty big deal, and they were also restricted from putting troops in the Rhineland, which is basically a area around here, the Rhine. That was a very industrial region, and then Hitler reoccupied it. France technically could have gone to war with them at that time, but did not. And mainly because 1 in 7 Frenchmen died in the First World War, and they weren't real gung-ho about repeating that experience. So ultimately they said, you know, whatever. They wrote a very angry letter to Hitler about it, and the French government decided to make a Popular Front government because they were scared. And that's basically those events there in history. Okay, more stuff. Put that... We need to get Blitzkrieg with much quickness. Oh. More research is possible. Great. There we go. 1936 also had some pretty cool events in it, like oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia, which to this day tends to have pretty important repercussions pretty much the world over. And, you know, other various little interesting things. You know, a lot of sort of older celebrities, if you're an older guy like myself, you might remember some of their stuff, was born in 1936, like Burt Reynolds was born in 1936. So, there's all that. Obviously, the world is in the Great Depression. The Soviets didn't really suffer from that as much, but they inflicted various wounds on themselves anyways, just to join in. And also, at the time, there were pretty massive light tank engine. I should deal with this before I get lost in yakking. Okay, so in the Soviet Union there was, in the early 30s, there was rapid collectivization, which changed the way agriculture was done and upset the whole agricultural system for some time. And basically completely altered Soviet society for quite a while as well. Getting lots of tank doctrines there is what I'm doing. Light tank. Ah, the Spanish Civil War as well. Okay, so I'll talk about that before I get into the domestic situation in the Soviet Union. So, Spain. Spain had a left-wing sort of situation come up because their monarchy basically fell apart. They had a republic, they had elections, blah, 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 and the elections started to get fairly left-wing, and as a result, the church, the army, and a couple other sort of conservative power elements rebelled against the republic, and there was a civil war in Spain. It was very bloody and bad. France and Britain decided not to intervene, and they tried to get everybody not to intervene and just let the civil war be in Spain. but Germany and Italy sent supplies, volunteers, and resources to help the nationalists. And the Soviet Union was one of the few countries that supported the Republic and helped them out, mainly supporting the communists, but also the Republicans in general, who weren't all far left people. Also, there was a brigade of American volunteers called the Lincoln Brigade, who were sent over with the aid of the Soviet Union to fight for the Republicans. They were called the International Brigades. The aid in the game doesn't really affect the outcome very much, or really change anything. They say that there's about a 50-50 chance between whichever side winning. I don't have the resources to really care, though. Alright, so 30s in Soviet Union. There were show trials of Mikhail Bakunin. Various people who were friends or enemies of Stalin were knocked out. Trotsky is already exiled. All that kind of stuff is going down as well. It's the start of the terror is in 1936. A lot of different people have different arguments as to why that all occurred, why the show trial started, and various high-level communist functionaries got more or less beasted and thrown in camps or executed. What exactly should I do? Yeah, that'll be good enough. Alright, so it was a pretty confusing time. Also, the Olympics were held in Berlin, which, hey, it just popped. And athletes from all over the world came there. It was held in Germany. Hitler was there. Germany won pretty well, but usually the host nation does pretty well. It also mentions the case of Jesse Owens, who was an African-American athlete who was the most successful singular athlete. There wasn't really any sort of racial prejudice against him displayed openly by the Nazis. Hitler did not shake his hand, which is a common or urban myth about it. Hitler had personally congratulated some German athletes, and the Olympic Committee told him that if he was going to do it for Germans, he had to do it for everybody. And so he was like, screw it, I won't do it for anybody. And because it could have been politically difficult. But in his home country, which was still incredibly racist at the time, Jesse Owens got basically no recognition whatsoever, and he didn't even get invited to go hang out at the White House. Which is now, even teams that win, like, not Olympic sports are invited pretty easily to the White House to meet the president and have a nice little photo op and stuff like that. So, and that was not the case for Jesse Owens. Okay. So, lots of aeronautical advances as well. Different things like that. There was an ice rescue in the Arctic Circle because the Soviets were trying to figure out if they could navigate east to west. So it's not on the map here, but you could go up and over and then come down and end up in the Bering Strait, which would be from here to here. And try and do that at least part of the year. There's a little country here called Tanatuva. It's no longer a country. I think it's a republic in Russia now. That's actually in this game of it losing its countryhood. The Soviet Union obviously had little republics within it, like Belarus, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, all that stuff. Then other ones that I don't really know about, because there are so many of them, that are sort of their own little independent regions. Okay, and we're getting pretty close to the end of 36. So it was a pretty interesting time in the world, also a pretty scary one. Active warfare throughout certain parts of the world already occurring. And basically, why did Italy want Ethiopia? to combine its two colonies here, which is like modern Eritrea and Somalia. They wanted to link them together. And also Libya was Italian also. Let's see, it looks like the Republicans are doing pretty good this time. So good for them. Also, you can see why there was a problem, because the French border is a mountain range, and also the nationalists could have blocked that pretty easily. It looks like they lost Barcelona, though, so that's no good. So, in real life, the most of the Soviet supplies ended up here in Cartagena, I think it's how you say it, and mainly in part because Valencia and Barcelona were active war zones for a lot of the time, and the resources were leaving from Sevastopol, going down through here and sailing around in the Mediterranean, so it took a little while to get there. So you didn't want to show up to a port that was no longer friendly. I think we've got enough supplies now. I can just dispense with worrying about it at all. Okie dokie. Austria, let's see. What's their state like? Europe. Austria. Yeah, Dolphus is already dead by 36. So, Austria was actually pretty friendly towards, yeah, there we go. I was looking at the wrong country. No, I wasn't. That was the right country. Yeah, so they were really good friends with Italy at the time. They were both sort of like their own little fascist boys club, and then the fascist leader in Austria got assassinated, probably by Hitler, and then they started to get very pro-German, and were eventually Anschlussed, annexed into Germany. Which, as you'll know, even before all the Anschluss and all that stuff occurred, Germany was much larger then than it is now. But yeah, all the Germans that lived here around Königsberg were moved to Germany by the Soviets, and now today this area is called Kaliningrad, and it's part of Russia. They moved a bunch of Russians in. Obviously, these Polish borders were all redrawn. The German eastern bits were chopped off and given to Poland in exchange. And now we get the big controversial part of this game. I argue that the purges should not help you this much, but they certainly do. And part of the reason why is you kill a whole bunch of your generals, your officer ratio is unaffected, which makes no sense, and you get 5 descent points, which isn't really that big of a deal at all. And you lose some of your ministers, but they're not really any good, so there's like no real reason to be terribly upset about it. But you get a whole bunch of new laws. I'm not going to go off of volunteer army. I can't get mobilization yet either, but I can get heavy industry emphasis, which will increase consumer good needs quite a bit, but will make life better all around for the building of factories. Also, you lose some leadership, but that's not like a total catastrophe. And we'll just plop these factories into Siberia. They were building massive factories in Siberia at the time, mainly because they were aware that there would probably be a war coming soon. And they didn't want their industry to be destroyed. So they stuck it out in Siberia, and a lot of people had to move out to Siberia if they wanted jobs. Also, Magnitogorsk came to be the largest steel plant in the world around this time. So, and that was one of Stalin's sort of pet projects, was to have a very big steel plant. And there's a lot of interesting stuff about it. There's also a pretty cool memoir written by a GE trained welder called Behind the Urals. If you want to check that out, it's a pretty cool book about a guy that was an American volunteer. He was sort of a communist too, and he wanted to help out in the Soviet Union, and he ended up working as a welder out there for a while. He married a Russian woman. And then Stalin kicked him out because he didn't trust foreigners anymore right before the start of the war. There was a bit of a spy craze. And now we wait for our neutrality to fall low enough to get a higher mobilization level. And with January rolling to a close, I think I'm going to cut this first video here. And end it. So I hope it was enjoyable and that you got some of the stories. I'm going to add more stories later, so that should be pretty fun. I tend to know a lot about the region because I got my degree in it. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully you thought it was pretty neat and it wasn't overly boring.